It's my pleasure this morning to introduce our speakers, Ed McLaughlin and Wyn Lydecker. It was interesting, about 2 months ago I was reading the Darien Times, and somewhere in the first section I noticed an article about a new book that had been written, and I noticed one of the authors was Wyn Lydecker, and I said, I know that person. And Wyn and I have known each other for over 30 years. We used to work together years ago, and you know, it's fun to have Wyn here today. Over the years, I'll start with Ed. Over the years, Ed has founded 4 businesses, and today runs Blue Sunsets LLC, a real estate and agent investment firm. His first business grew into an Inc. magazine 500 company, and later he sold it to a Fortune 500 company where Skip became CEO of the company's global workplace business for the Americas. He was named Entrepreneur of the Year by Ernst & Young in 2001. Skip is a member of the Tufts Medical Center Board of Governors, where he founded the David E. Wazer Breast Cancer Research Fund. He graduated from the College of the Holy Cross and is a member of its Board of Trustees. He's also active in philanthropy, lives with his wife here in Darien, and has 3 adult children. Wyn Lydecker is founder of Upstart Business Planning, and today works with entrepreneurs to develop plans that answer the questions that investors ask most often. You'll have to tell us what those questions are, right? Previously, she was Managing Director of Business Plan International in New York City and co-founder, co-director, I should say, of the Small Business Resource Center at Norwalk Community College. Wyn has an MBA in Finance and Marketing from the Wharton School and a BA in Economics from the University of California, Santa Barbara. She helped found the nonprofit At Home in Darien here in town that we're all familiar with and serves on its board. She also lives here in town with her husband and has 2 adult children. It's my pleasure to introduce you both, and looking forward to your presentation.
Well, it's quite an honor to be here, and appreciate the time and everybody giving us a listen about the book we've written, why we wrote it, and how this project evolved. Probably the first thing I can say is the title of the book is called The Purpose is Profit. And it's interesting nowadays where some businesses are focused on user growth and don't worry about profit. Wyn and I put our heads together and said, no, most businesses where you put your time, your money, and your reputation at risk should be thinking about making a profit. And certainly there's great success with Amazon and Uber and other businesses that focused on users first. But there's, the highway is littered with other folks that tried to start businesses focused solely on user growth, that if they had just taken a step back and said, let's really think about how we make a profit in building our business. So Wyn and I put our heads together and said, let's write a book and let's tie that directly into the core of our message. The basic discipline of if you're going to spend time and you're going to put your money behind something and your reputation, make sure that you're going to make a profit in doing it. Another feature is, and this may be true for all of you too, whether it's your children or your grandchildren. In my case, my son is very anxious to be an entrepreneur. And I just felt an obligation to kind of write down, hey, here's some of the things you really need to be thinking about. You can't just jump into the deep end of the pool with cement shoes on. You've really got to kind of think about what you're doing before you lift off. And I guess that influenced the writing a bit from my side as well. The way we're going to cover things today, we're going to keep it simple and focus on 3 things. What are the 3 critical ingredients about starting a business? I'm sure there's a number of you that have been entrepreneurs in your career, certainly had big corporate careers as well. Just by a show of hands, who has started a business in the past in this room? Wow. So, yeah. With all humility, these are our views, but I'm anxious to hear your views, and we would like to have you post up questions, certainly at the end, but also along the way if you feel compelled. So we're going to cover what we believe are the 3 critical ingredients. We're going to talk a little bit about the book and then really open up for questions and answers. But I kind of felt this was a unique opportunity because both Wyn and I are from Darien, and probably most, if not a good majority of the folks here are from Darien, and I thought you might be thinking, how did 2 Darienites get together to write a book? So Wyn, why don't you make a few comments on that?
Yeah, how exactly did I get to know Ed McLaughlin here? Well, early in the 1990s, I was doing marketing for a local architect. You may know him, Michael Cassello. And in that time, Michael had a chance to meet Ed and his relatively new company, and was so excited about it. He came back and he told me how impressed he was and all the things that Ed was doing. The next thing I knew, he said, I'm going to close my business, I'm going to go work for Ed. So I went off and did other things, and you heard some of them. I became a co-director of the Small Business Resource Center at Norwalk Community College, and I became very involved with the local entrepreneurship community in southwestern Connecticut. And I also stayed in touch with Michael, and Michael had me come over and meet Ed. He had me tour his business, and I also was incredibly impressed with what Ed was accomplishing. He had a new real estate services firm called USI, and it was in Stamford, and they were doing amazing services and amazing business. Fast forward a few years, and I did get recruited in the dot-com boom, actually near the peak of the dot-com boom, to write business plans for Business Plans International in New York City. And I became even more involved with the local venture community out here in Connecticut. And some of the members of the nominating committee for the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award asked me if I knew somebody I should nominate. And I thought about it. One day I was driving up I-95 and I looked over at the buildings in Stamford and I thought, Ed! So I asked Michael if it would be okay if I nominated Ed, and of course the answer was yes. So we got together, Ed and I, and we filled out all the applications, and the things that they were looking for was financial strength, value proposition, and giving back to the community. That was a very important part of what Ernst & Young was looking for. So Ed not only got the nomination, but we had a big gala dinner. We heard that he'd won in his category, and he was not alone there were some other categories that had winners. John Bello, who started Sobe Beverages, John Frieda, who started Frieda Hair Care, and also Arthur Talk World Discovery. So they all won in their categories too. So Ed had a fantastic company. And from there, we continued on and off to work together. I didn't nominate him to get work. I nominated him because I thought he was just phenomenal. But now Ed's going to tell you a little bit more about how things progressed toward reading and how we progressed toward writing a book.
So after that success, I'm no fool, I asked Wyn to get involved in different projects along the gestation of our business, and ultimately, probably the denouement of our effort to that point was writing the information memorandum on the sale of USI companies to Johnson Controls. Johnson Controls based out of Milwaukee. And we had an investment banker, and we ran a bid process and went through all of that, which is written in the book. And but I said to the investment banker, I want Wyn Lydecker to edit the information memorandum. And she took her time and put pieces together, moved pieces around, and applied her Wharton MBA and her writing skills and so on. And anyway, lo and behold, we're in the boardroom of Johnson Controls. At the time, John Barth was the CEO. We're sitting across the table, myself and my business partner. The rest of the table was filled with Johnson Controls executives. And John Barth is standing across the table and asking us questions. And it was a nerve-wracking but interesting process. And we apparently made it through. At the end of the meeting, the CFO, a gentleman by the name of Steve Roll, pulled me aside and he said, you know, we buy about 180 businesses every year And he said that information memorandum was the best one we've ever seen. And I think in large part what it had to do with is we really did run a high integrity business. In other words, we were not loading the business up with expenses. And Johnson Controls found that quite shocking. And literally when we sold the business, we had a huge after-tax cash balance, and they were like, geez, why didn't you guys pay this out in dividends? And that was never our MO. We wanted to be super healthy at all times. And I'll try and tell a story about how we use that stash cash as we get into the presentation. Anyway, given all that success with Wyn, after selling the business, a neighbor from Darien said, I think you should teach. And I thought, I just, I can't see myself teaching full time, but I feel a need to reduce to writing some of the things I learned over building these 4 businesses, and made a commitment to write a book, which took 4 years, which we'll tell you a little bit about. But I called Wyn and said, would you join me? And sure enough, she jumped on the team and said, I'd be honored. So what you have is, you have operational expertise and you have technical competence. And we kind of married that together and sewed it together through the full arc of starting a business, conceiving of the idea, to scaling it, to success, failure, and then ultimately exiting the business. And then we even talk about what happened after the exit. So it kind of covers the full arc, which was a little different for us versus some of the business books, and we'll talk about some of those as we go. So that's a quick backdrop. Personally, from my standpoint, I spent about 50% of my career in big business, corporate, right out of school, Holy Cross, got a job with IBM. I thought, this is fantastic, I'll go to work for IBM in New York or Boston. They said, we have 2 spots for you, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, or Peoria, Illinois. So I went to Peoria, and it was a great experience, learned a ton, and I met some people already in the audience that spent time at IBM, and it's just a wonderful company, and I can't say enough good things, especially back in the day. I can't speak as much about how it is now, but I'm still a stockholder, so I'm pretty pleased with my association there. Left IBM, joined Hewlett-Packard, very different company, loved it. Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard were running the business when I joined. It was a phenomenal experience. It was very much more, we'll give you as much rope as you need, just don't hang yourself. Whereas IBM was much more disciplined. Here's, how to dress, what to say, plan sales call, plan presentation. HP was much more flexible. The whole time I was doing that, I had a hankering to start my own business. I had just gotten to a point where my goal was, I want to put my signature on something. I want to hold my product and my service out to the world to say yes or no to. I feel well trained, I feel well experienced, but it's time for me to kind of stand on my own 2 feet. And I really wanted control more than anything else. So 50% was big corporate, and then the next 50% was startups, and there were 4 of them there. USI companies, which we'll talk about. It was a real estate contracts business, B2B, business to business. It was not residential, it was commercial. Sigma Communications, which published a magazine, national magazine. The magazine was called the National Register of Commercial Real Estate. Sequentra Solutions is a technology business. It was all about information management, and it was specifically project management. Because what was happening is the USI business was growing, ultimately globally, and the customers wanted to have an ability to see what was going on each project around the world. So Sequentra became the tool and ultimately became a leading solution in the space. And then lastly, Blue Sunsets, which is kind of more like a family office, just doing residential projects and angel investing and kind of one-off activities. Now, does anybody know why, can venture a guess why Sigma Communications is in red? Sigma Communications did not work. And there's a chapter dedicated to failure in the book, and it's all about Sigma Communications. And Sigma sucked down all of the profit for the first 3 years that USI launched. We took all the money, poured it into Sigma, which was a much bigger visionary business. I'm sure over time you've seen the DuPont registry. Well, this was a magazine that would put commercial property listings for sale, for lease, industrial, office, retail, anywhere around the U.S. and then ultimately around the globe. It did get some traction. Michael Bloomberg saw it. He put it on the Bloomberg terminal system. The centerpiece of the magazine was called the Commercial Property Exchange. The idea was that folks could exchange properties. A lesson learned, it so happened our first office, the neighboring office, was a gentleman by the name of Dick Monroe, who was past chairman of Time Warner. And I got to know his secretary, and I thought, well, if I'm going to ask anybody about how to run a magazine, I'll ask the secretary if I can meet with Dick. He was ex-chairman, so I thought he might have more time on his hands. Well, sure enough, he was terrific. He invited me in, and we spoke, and he said, here's what you need to watch out for. He connected me with other resources and so on, and he said, just one thing, Ed. Do you have the stomach for this? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, are you well-funded enough to lift this off? This is a 747 size Vision. The other business you have is a service business. Are you going to run out of gas? And I was like, I think I'll be fine. In the back of my head, I thought, Dick doesn't know how smart I am. Anyway, he capped that off by saying, well, let me put it to you this way. Do you realize that Sports Illustrated did not make a profit until 6 years out? And instead of listening to my advisor, I thought I knew better. And we lifted this business off and frankly ran out of gas at about 45,000 feet 3 years out, and we had to shut the business down. My point here is just to say that this book covers success and failure. The subtitle is The Truth, and we really tried to focus on the truth, not sugarcoat. Everybody's going to make money, it's so easy, start a business. We really got into the nitty-gritty of what it takes because we didn't want our own kids reading it and deceiving themselves, right, Wyn?
Absolutely right. I'm going to say when I did tour his offices, I remember him showing me the magazine and the people working on the magazine. I thought, wow, he's doing that too? And it was maybe a little bit too much.
Right, exactly. So it was a beautiful idea, but it didn't work. Okay, so, that's the magazine. It was a good-looking piece. We mailed out about 20,000 units. It was for, you see the second line, serving financial officers and real estate executives. As I mentioned, the centerpiece was called the Commercial Property Exchange. So we had articles and ads. It was hard to generate revenue from our ads because we didn't have an audited publication. We learned those things along the way, but ultimately that went down in flames. And if I had been smart enough to partner with a gentleman who runs a business now that's a publicly traded company called CoStar, which at the time the door was open to partner, I might be making a different presentation today. He won the battle, and I was foolish in that 50% of something would have been better than 100% of nothing. When I was with Hewlett-Packard, I graduated college in '78, went to work for IBM, joined HP about '81. I was so frustrated that I wanted to leave and start my own business that I wrote this promise out to myself. And we only highlight that because I carried this around in my wallet for 7 years, not 5, even though I promised myself I would open the business in 5. But what it did is it took the pressure off me because I was struggling with what kind of business could I start. It wasn't that I wasn't committed to start a business, it's just that I didn't want to throw caution to the wind, jump into the deep end of the pool and potentially drown. I wanted to start a business that I felt really had a chance to succeed. So that's kind of the next part, which is the 3 critical ingredients. And the first ingredient is distinctive competence. We're also going to talk about securing adequate funding and then successfully scaling your business. And if you think about it, those are probably the three things: is what kind of business should I start? Do I have enough money to do it? And where am I going to get the money? And scaling is the number one, premature scaling is the number one reason why new businesses fail. You've heard the saying, if we build it, they will come. Businesses that live by that often die by that. I call the alternate to that is simultaneous production and consumption. You win the contract, you apply the resources. If you apply the resources before you win the contract and you don't win the contract, that's usually where things go downhill. So we're going to talk about distinctive competence. By the way, I'm only talking a lot. Wyn, certainly feel free to chime in. She's going to get more heavily involved in the Q&A portion. And we kind of set it up that way. So I don't want you to think I'm being a hog over here with the mic. Distinctive competence. When I was trying to figure out what kind of business to start, I was involved in a big contract. I left HP, went to work for a company, a big developer in Texas called Trammell Crow Company. And I was assigned to a big account in Chicago, Baxter Healthcare. And Baxter Healthcare had just purchased American Hospital Supply. So they needed to rationalize the distribution network of Baxter Healthcare with American Hospital Supply, which at that time would have been the largest distribution network. So I got to know the head of real estate and some of the other folks, and they said, we want to single source all this work, and we want you to come up with a business model that will allow us to do that. And I got so deep into that one day it dawned on me, you know what, I have a competence. I think I can build a business around this because it really was hugely successful. So as I mentioned, I struggled for years. The distinctive competence is a combination of skills, proven experience, industry knowledge, track record of success. If you've been successful, obviously, in a certain space, and the customers know you and like you, you understand the competition, the pricing, and you're going to open up a business in that area, I think you have a much higher probability of succeeding. And sometimes I'll meet with people and I'll say, what kind of business are you thinking about starting? And I'm going to go into the restaurant business. And I said, why are you going to do that? Well, I like to eat. And I said, well, you know, that's really not a great reason. Maybe it should be because you've worked in restaurants, because you have a genuine love of food, you understand and love customer service, and you're willing to work the extraordinary hours that it takes to run a successful restaurant. And so my whole point here is, if you're going to jump into the deep end of the pool, if you can pick an area where you have distinctive competence, you have a much higher probability of succeeding. Now take a look at this chart. Nowadays, as we mentioned earlier, there's this issue: do I focus on profit or do I focus on users? And there's a lot of pressure now. We all read about it in the paper. Focus on user growth. Don't worry about profit. That'll come later. The other thing is, do you use your competence, or do you try and think up an idea that disrupts an industry area? And of course, if you're focused on the bottom left-hand corner, you want to build a business that changes the world, you're going to be one of the unicorns. Obviously, there's a very high risk of coming up with that kind of a model, but there's also a very high return. My point was, use your distinctive competence, focus on profit, fill a need, it's lower risk, solid return, and the next slide kind of talks about the evolution of my business by doing that. In the centerpiece, you've got a building all broken down, and you've got different service buckets all around the building. Well, we started with 3 people doing one thing, the highlighted area, called transaction management. Basically, finding spaces and helping companies find that. And the next thing you know, those companies said, hey, can you help us build out our spaces and design them and furnish them? Can you help us with energy management? And we need a whole workplace strategy, not just in the US, but around the globe. And we need all these facilities that we built cared for. and nurtured, and we need all the technology that manages all that. So slowly over time, by going after one niche, as I mentioned in the prior slide, just filling a need rather than sitting down going, I'm going to develop a business that's going to change the world. That's pretty hard to come up with that idea. And nowadays, it's interesting when we talk to some millennials. I mean, they want to go right after here. I want to change the world, you know. But there's a lot of risk in that, you know. And so our point, probably old school, is more fill a need, make a profit, and build from there by letting your customers help your business expand. And this was the USI company business, and this is how it evolved.
I'd like to add a little something here, in that when he talked to you about the magazine that failed, that was an area where Ed did not have distinctive competence. He had the distinctive competence in the real estate services, but he lacked it in how to be a publisher. He'd never been a publisher before. He didn't know anything about it. And we point out in the book that this is a great example of why you want to focus on your distinctive competence when you start a business, rather than focusing on something that's just your passion. And he had passion for starting a publishing business. The other thing is, in that other slide, he was focusing on user growth when he had that publication. How many people can I get to sign up for it? He wasn't doing the profit. And so all these things came into play as great examples that he lived through of how to not start a business.
Very, very strong point. Okay, so part and parcel to distinctive competence is we tried to put a slide together. Along the x-axis is years of experience, and along the y-axis is your talent level, if you will. I consider Steve Jobs visionary talent. Obviously Mark Zuckerberg, leaving college early, starting a business, hitting the ball out of the park and never looking back. But that's a very small minority, but it's glamorous and romantic, and young people can get romanticized by that, and that kind of led to why we wrote this book, is, hey, let's cut the romance. The fact of the matter is, you got to make a living, you got to produce a profit, you can't pay your bills, you know, and so on. So then we said there are some folks that have adaptive skill sets, say within 5 years they get their business degree, they come up with an idea, or they become a product manager for a company and they test out their ideas, what I call road-tested innovation. Ultimately for me, it took 15 years before I had a distinctive competence. The bells and whistles went off. And what's interesting about this slide is a study was done recently by the Kauffman Foundation, lower right-hand corner there. And what's interesting about this is millennials in blue are not starting as many businesses as the folks in the green. 35 to 44 is the highest area. And that's kind of where I started my business. Did a lot of corporate stuff, and then 36 years old started my business. Now the challenge is, I had 2 kids, and we moved out of a rental house into a much smaller rental house, and we took the risk. But I had more confidence to bring to the table, so I had a much higher probability of succeeding. And I think that's what this chart's showing, that more businesses are being started by folks with experience. And that experience ranges from 35 all the way up to 65 plus. So if anybody wants to start a business after the presentation, come on up and let's do it. Second area, and I'm almost done because we do want to open it up with questions, but I think we've all watched this whole issue of how do you secure startup funding, and we've all watched this show, Shark Tank. As a matter of fact, one of the endorsers of our book is Barbara Corcoran. I had her speak at an event, and there's a lot of, I think it's fun to watch the show because you see these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed entrepreneurs, some of them have awesome businesses, and it's very interesting when the folks that have the really good businesses that have a clear path to profitability, have revenue, all of a sudden the sharks start fighting with one another to get a stake in the business. Whereas the other businesses, the sharks either dismiss them, or they seemingly take advantage of them. You know, they'll say, I'll take 50% of your business, you've put 5 years into it and all your savings, and it comes across like they're taking advantage. So we took a step back, Wyn and I, and said, okay, what is really necessary to get the funding that you need? This is a bit of an eye chart, but we listed 10 specific things, from your product relieves significant pain, you have distinctive competence in the field in which you're entering, you have a working prototype. Number 4, pre-orders is huge. You have an existing revenue stream, you have a clear path to profitability, you have a defensible technological advantage, significant market opportunity, a great management team. And our argument is, and what we've seen is, if you have 7 out of 10, you're almost guaranteed to get the money, particularly if number 4, pre-orders, is one of the 7. And I think what happens sometimes is when we've noticed, when folks start businesses, they go out for funding before they even have maybe 1 or 2 of these bases covered, and they can't get the funding, or they're completely taken advantage of, and they give up control of their business before they even get much out of the gate. Our argument is 7 out of 10 virtually guarantees funding, particularly if contractual pre-orders is one of the 7 components. The last point, successfully scaling your business. The whole book is about successfully scaling your business. So I'm going to try something, but it's too much to cover too quickly. We have a chapter called 10 Commandments of Startup Profit. And the 10 Commandments of Startup Profit, I'm going to show you them, but it's too much to cover now. But here they are. Did you build a business based on your distinctive competence? Do you have a superior value proposition? Do you have a profitable business model? And then number 4 is an interesting one. It's not something you have to plan for, it's something you have to do. And there are many entrepreneurs that build successful businesses, but they outsource the responsibility to look after the money, and bad things happen because they've trusted somebody that, frankly, they shouldn't have trusted. And then so on down the line, we found these to be particularly advantageous. I do want to say something here. I mentioned we build a financial war chest. We kept a lot of our earnings, and we didn't pay it out in dividends, and paid taxes, and had a pretty good sized balance sheet. And one day, we were competing for the complete outsourcing of all Computer Science Corporation's real estate and facilities. And our competitor was the Staubach company, Roger Staubach's company. And the gentleman we were selling to was a Dallas Cowboy fan. And Roger had built a terrific reputation of doing the right thing in business. Really no blemish. And I met him and I liked him, but obviously we wanted to win. And we were told we were going to win this contract. And my business partner out in California at that time, Computer Science Corporation was based in El Segundo, had built a terrific relationship with the C-suite, the chief financial officer, a guy named Lee Level, and I think it was Tom Anderson, the chief administrative officer. And we were working with the head of real estate, and we were told we were going to win the business. And at the last minute, we called the Friday and said, what was the decision? And they said, oh, the business went to Staubach. And of course, we were both frustrated, and we decided we're going to call Lee Level and ask, the old Hail Mary, you go over the guy's head, which almost never works. But we did, and they agreed to meet. And I was sitting in Darien here on Fox Hill Lane, that's where I lived at the time, and that was the weekend of the Army-Navy football game, and all I could see is Roger Staubach walking the sidelines with a hot dog with my customer. And I just thought, I got to get out to Los Angeles, and we went out there, we presented, And we took that war chest. We went in, we said, we will save you $35 million. And to put our money where our mouth is, we'll give you $1 million check up front. And they said, it's yours. And the contract turned. We used that offer of $1 million check up front against our contract savings, probably somewhere on the order of 30 or 40 times. And the only time it was ever taken was Lee Level at Computer Science Corporation. He added it to the quarterly earnings. And $1 million unplanned at the last second to the quarterly earnings is a very positive thing. Anyway, that's how we used our financial war chest. And the public companies we were competing with, Jones Lang LaSalle, giant company, $1.5 billion, $2 billion, CB, Richard Ellis at the time, Coldwell Banker was the backdrop to that. They were probably approaching $3 or $4 billion. They couldn't respond to that kind of an offer that quickly, nor could the Staubach company, because nobody was willing to part with that kind of cash and bet on their value proposition. In exchange for that $1 million, we did get a 10% share in the saves, so we thought, if we think we can achieve $35 million, we get a 10% share, we're going to get $3.5 million back on that $1 million put down. And then usually that's why nobody took us up after that, because they said, if you're willing to gamble that, then that 10% must be real. And that drove about a 50% close rate when we would make that offer. Okay, about the book. That's all the stuff we poured into the book. Covered the full arc, talked about success, failure. Oops, sorry. So we tried to share the formula for startup success, really get to the truth about what it takes to run a business, be honest about the challenges you face, and then be very deliberate about profit from the get-go. We don't just talk it. We think every business decision when you're starting up should factor profit into the decision. And our goal ultimately is to disrupt the startup failure rate, which currently runs at about within 2 years, 75% of technology businesses fail, and within 5 years, 50% of any business fails. So the risks are high, and we think a lot of that can be overcome, and we can turn the tables on the startup failure rate by teaching the truth about what it takes to build a business, and not being bashful about talking about building profitable businesses. These are the questions. What kind of business should I start? When should I start my business? What do I do first, second, or third? Where do I get the money? And how do I scale? That's what's covered in the book. Our competitors, have you folks heard about the book, The Lean Startup, by a show of hands? Okay? Terrible book, don't even... The Lean Startup has a philosophy that says, launch, fail fast, and pivot. The problem I have with that is failure is expensive and often not an option. And if you have a son, daughter, or grandson or daughter, and they have a bit of a nest egg, if they're not buried in student loans, and they can't take the risk of just failing numerous times until they figure it out. They have to kind of know what they're getting into and have the highest probability of success. So that's ours is plan to profit from the get-go. Theirs is launch, fail fast, and pivot, and they make no bones about that. The second book is Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, and he makes it very clear at the outset. It's an entertaining read. He's very focused on users. He's very focused on build a monopoly. He's very focused on that's the only place he wants to invest. Obviously, the guy's done good, so it's an entertaining read. But if you're thinking about building a business, it's hard to sit down and go, I think I'll build a business and it will be a monopoly. I mean, it's hard to kind of figure that one out. So ours is much more practical business know-how. That's pretty much it. We can open it up for Q&A now if that sounds good. Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for coming. This is amazing. And
Time out,
talking
time
about-
out, time out, time out.
I thought I projected.
Nope.
I don't, okay. Thank you again very much for all of your input and your knowledge. My name is Ed Wilson. I'm a member here of this distinguished group, and 2.5 years ago I started a business which is called A Total Look by Total Dog. We're a mobile pet grooming van. We come to you. You don't have to put the dog in a car, take him over to one of the brick and mortar places. We even bring our own hot water and our expertise. We're the size of an EMS van, so we're fully stocked. I'm in the 65 plus group when I decided to start the business. It's exciting, but I think you and I have to do a sit down. And it's about the profitability and the ups and downs of the business. And by profession, I'm a retired school psychologist, so I was used to a salary. And this is no longer a salary sort of thing. And it's fascinating. It's a steep learning curve. We have the ups and downs and the emotions. So again, at the end of the meeting, if I can approach the bench,
Yeah.
I'll come up and we'll
Yeah,
talk.
great. We'll definitely sit down.
Be happy to
Okay.
talk to you.
Yeah. Other questions?
Here we go.
Spike Reed. The premise of your book is absolutely spot on in terms of profit and the reality behind trying to get a business up and going. My background is marketing and advertising, and so what you described in the book, or at least what I see here, is primarily financially driven. How much do you ascribe to the importance of marketing and advertising to a successful business?
We have a whole chapter on marketing. Entrepreneurial branding is the name of the chapter, and then because Ed came from a sales background, we have a whole chapter on sales, which is incredibly important, called Sales is a Contact Sport. And we even have a little section in it that says, like warning, that we're getting into the deep dive of sales here. And then we have a lot of very specific advice about how to go about selling.
But as Wyn said, there's a chapter on entrepreneurial branding, and I think it's hugely important. What was interesting is that magazine that failed, the one thing that it did do, and we write about it, is it operated as a Trojan horse for the service business USI. In other words, the 20,000 CFOs and CREs that we were mailing to, we were writing articles about USI success stories in the magazine that they would read about that would grease the pathway for us to get a meeting to present our value proposition. So that we did get some benefit. We would have never spent that amount of money on marketing a national publication. Those cost $10 a copy. We did 20,000 units. That was $200,000 a quarter. It was a quarterly. So we were spending pretty big bucks pretty early on marketing. But I'm a huge believer that that is a space where small businesses don't spend enough. I think that's one thing. And then, as Wyn said, sales is a contact sport. What we talk about there is the graveyard of failures are strewn along the road with entrepreneurs that said, my product's so good it will sell itself. Yes. Oh, sorry.
Well, I'm back here. You're next, Gary.
Sorry, Gary. We have bought your book and have started to read it and commend it to anyone as a first comment.
Thank you.
Secondly, in terms of, I haven't gotten to the point where I've heard that most startups fail because they're underfunded. Can you maybe just talk a little bit about that?
There are a lot of reasons for failure, and it's not just underfunding. I think it's also that you lack distinctive competence, that you don't have the right management team, and that you're not filling a need. But the underfunding comes from, I think, not having the pre-sales. If you haven't gone out into the marketplace and seen that people will pay you real money for your product, that's going to doom you to failure, and it's going to make it much harder to raise funding. If you have the things in place that show that you can actually have a working business model and that you can sell your product and people will pay for it, it's much easier to get the funding. Now, speaking to the failure of not having enough funding, that did happen with your magazine, and I think you ought to talk about that.
Right. Well, clearly one of the big failure points in the magazine, in many businesses, as you say, is you run out of gas. And if you're taking off and you're flying along at 40,000 feet, it's not pretty when you run out of gas. And it depends on the scale and scope of your business. Do you have enough money? When we started the service business that we started, it was 2 men and a dog. We had, we capitalized the business with about $100,000. And we knew that money would take us, because it was a service business, we didn't have the cost of manufacturing the product. Then all of a sudden we go over here and we start publishing a magazine that costs $10 a copy, fully loaded, shipping, production, printing, and so on. And the table's completely turned. And that's why Dick Monroe said, do you have the stomach for this, and can you last 6 years? And that was Sports Illustrated, which one might say Sports Illustrated is more fun to read than the National Register.
But also, John, another answer for you is that companies do need to plan. That's one reason why we say plan to make a profit from the get-go. Spend some time, and we say this in the book, spend some time figuring out your back-of-the-envelope calculations. How are you going to make money? That's going to help you raise enough money from the get-go, or even take your own savings. As we say in the book, bootstrapping is best. But if you plan properly, then you'll know how much money you're going to need, and you can go out and make the right ask, as opposed to just start up, see if somebody will fund you, and then fail.
Yes.
Hi. A number of us are active at SCORE here, and this book sounds like it's worth reading to make us better mentors, so that's my to-do. And on that, but I'm going to address this at Wyn. Two things. You mentioned you're active with the Norwalk Community College Small Business.
I was, years ago.
Say something more about that. And then also, we talk about funding, but funding isn't just one thing. There's all kinds of sources and needs of funds and all that kind of stuff. So maybe some commentary about that.
Okay. Well, I haven't been with Norwalk Community College for many years. I mean, that was back in the 1990s that I was there. But at the time, we actually did work actively with SCORE. Our whole Business Resource Center was trying to connect people to the entire community that supported small business and entrepreneurship. And one of the things that we did tell people is exactly what you just said. There's so many different sources of funding. You've got your own savings, you've got bank loans. Nowadays you've got, well, back then you didn't have crowdfunding, but nowadays you have crowdfunding, which is very, very helpful. And you've got equity in your home perhaps, and you can get money for that. You can get personal loans. You can borrow from friends and family. You can use credit cards, which we don't think is a good idea. But usually when people are starting out, they bootstrap a little bit with their own funds, and they get friends and family funding. And then when they've proven that they can have some traction, then you can go for the other sorts of outside funding. And I think SCORE is a wonderful, wonderful organization that does help people get in the right place. And also the small business development centers that are run by the Small Business Administration are very good too. They provide excellent advice to people who are starting out.
One thing I just would like to add to Wyn's, when we were writing the book, we were telling a story because we thought that would keep people's interest, the struggles and so on. But in the body of writing it, we found ourselves writing a technical guide that we ultimately called the Startup Roadmap, which is at the back of the book. And it's the 21 critical steps that a business would take to launch. We also wrote another manual called the Startup Funding Guide, which covers everything from crowdfunding to all different facets, bootstrapping,
or even getting, small business, like micro loans that exist. The crowdfunding has been great, especially for women and minorities, believe it or not, because a lot of the venture capitalists and other people who lend and give money to people and they're all men, and men tend to be the ones that get the money. So crowdfunding has actually equalized things a great deal, and it's been great. About 30% of businesses that succeed started with crowdfunding now.
Skip, I was going to ask you, I was intrigued with the list of the 3 items on the distinctive competence. That is, I think, a very important point, but what I didn't quite understand is when you went and saw Dick Monroe about your Sigma Communications, why didn't you think to go out and recruit someone that really knew the publishing business as opposed to doing it yourself?
I mean, that's a great question. I said we enumerated 7 failure points, and the first one literally is I didn't follow my own advice. I had no distinctive competence, and failure point number 1 in the book, chapter 7, it tells the story and it says I didn't follow my own advice. I've done that a few times.
Your question's really good, because if you don't have distinctive competence and you really want to start a business in an area, you can hire it. You can bring that in on your management team. You can have a great management team. I just said something wrong about the crowdfunding. It's 30% of companies that go out to crowdfund wind up doing it successfully. I said things backward. I'm sorry.
Hello. I'm a civil engineer. I've been in private practice for 50 years. Been very successful. I'm trying to retire. The problem is that I get possibly 20 items of mail every day. 15 of them are funding requests. I can't even get enough mail that pertains to my business anymore. I don't know what happened. I think I'm not unique, but I get 3 out of 4 envelopes a day for requests for money from me, not for work. And I don't know how you can continue in business any length of time if you have this situation. What happened? Somebody put my name out somewhere and sold it or something, because I can't open my mail. It takes me 20 minutes to read the mail, and all of it is asking me for money instead of me asking them. I used to advertise 20 years ago. I gave it up. I didn't need to. I had enough confidence that people called me anyway.
Right.
Now I can't get a phone call through that it isn't somebody looking for money from me. What do you do? How do you get off these lists? How do you survive?
Oh, that makes it worse. I tried that. That didn't help at all.
Call them up and say, take me off your list. I don't know.
Question up here. Sorry about that.
I have two questions. One, what are your thoughts about starting a business in a highly regulated industry, i.e. financial services? And secondly, when one goes and looks for funding, how much emphasis does one put on sweat equity?
Sure. Well, you're right. We didn't talk about sweat equity and the sacrifice that it takes. We do in the book. I mean, the bottom line is if you want it bad enough, you got to kind of cut your expenses. You got to sacrifice. You got to have a partner who's ready to commit, and you've got to be willing to be involved in it if it needs it 24/7. I know when I started my business, we had it was a rental property. I said to my wife, we had been saving to buy a house. I said, do you mind if we take that nest egg? We were going to buy a house, and we're going to move into a rental property in a house behind a house. It was 1,000 square feet. We had 4 kids. Our old neighbors came over. They looked around, and they were like, wow, the wheels really have come off here. McLaughlin family. And it was kind of embarrassing, but you had to stand up to that, because it really did look that way. And we were willing to do it. We were willing to do it. And in large part, my wife was born on a farm in Arkansas. You know, she was used to hard work, getting up early, doing whatever it takes. So I never once did she ever question what I was doing, and I was gone 24/7 for probably the first, 3 years. And so, I mean, sweat equity is huge. It makes a big difference. When you're working your way through a learning curve, if you're willing to put in time, and it takes you twice as long, if you put twice as much time, you can still get through it as fast. And a lot of folks nowadays, they want to open up a business, particularly thematically younger folks, and they want it to be convenient to their schedule. And I don't relate to that at all.
The thing is, I'm wondering about is when you're out looking for funding.
I can speak to that. Every venture capitalist or angel investor who I've ever met has always put a great deal of stock into sweat equity. They want to know that you have sacrificed and you have put a lot of work into your business, especially if you forego a salary for a while and you're just working for your business. That counts for a great deal.
A question I asked at the beginning was how many, by a show of hands, started their own business in the room, but now I want to kind of turn that, and I'm just curious. All the businesses that I started, I bootstrapped, meaning I used my own money to start. I took the risk. I didn't go for outside capital, and I'm a big believer in that. And I know sometimes you can't do that just because the size and scale of your dream or your vision is going to just require more capital than you have. But I'm a big believer in bootstrapping is best because you maximize control. We got to a point where the business grew so successful that we had private equity people coming in saying, hey, we want to put money into your business. And we were like, what do we need your money for? They have plenty of money. We didn't need the money. So a question I have is, out of the entrepreneurs, the folks in the room that started businesses, how many bootstrapped it, if you could show of hands, where you used your own money? I mean, I don't know if you would agree with me, but that's a beautiful way to go. If you can do it. And the reason why I say that in particular is sometimes when businesses start, they hit natural bumps in the road and they haven't really defined themselves yet, and they go for outside capital, and then the venture groups that are listening take advantage of that. And if you just get to a point where you have some real orders, you have a definition of your market and where you're going, and then you go for outside capital, where you have proof of concept, your terms are going to be so much better.
I have a feeling that an awful lot of people who start businesses are inventors, not entrepreneurs. And that's very different. The inventor has the technical knowledge, but he knows nothing about the business, and that's a fatal flaw. Do you talk about that in your book, or have you looked into that? The difference between those two?
We do not address inventors per se in the book, but we do address that you have to have a good management team, and that's what inventors have to do. They've got to go and get the person with the business expertise to work with them. And I know that there's a Connecticut inventors group. I don't know if you're familiar with it, and they meet monthly, and I think they're all incredible people, but I think the ones that have done the good businesses are the ones who've been able to find some business acumen somewhere.
I was one of the people that raised their hands when you asked how many started a business with their own money. I started my first business when I was 20 years old because I felt I wanted to be the president of my company while all my friends were starting in the corporate, and they were working their way up, and they said someday I'll be maybe a vice president. So I felt I'll start as the president. And one of the things I'm basically an inventor, so I've invented products, and I've marketed and manufactured my own products for many years. One of the things that I discovered early was the importance of creative thinking. When I first started, I was hit with a lot of obstacles from the left, from the right, and I was constantly having to think how I could overcome those. And I found over the years, meeting many inventors who have come to me for advice, that a lot of people, regardless of how many books they read, should not go into their own business.
Right.
Not everybody is cut out to be in their own business. And I'm wondering if your book at all talks about the power of creative thinking.
I mean, it's not a book about innovation or creative thinking. We do say if you've got it and you can capitalize on it, that's a beautiful thing, or you have to partner with somebody who does. But it's not, you wouldn't read our book because it will help you think creatively. You would read our book if you would recommend our book to somebody who maybe had a little bit of rose-colored glasses about what it takes to build and run a business. The actual mechanics. That's what our book is about. It's not about the creative process.
I started a import ladies sportswear business over 30 years ago, which I still have. I'm trying to wind down. I've been trying to retire for 3 years, but it's not so easy to retire. But anyway, I was very interested in your last story about Roger Staubach and how you put in the extra $1 million, etc. Does that mean that you had a really high markup so that you could work that out, or he was trying to steal the business? I'm just curious, because I mean, if you were able to throw in all the extra carrots and everything,
right,
there must have been something there.
Yeah. Well, the business, we didn't get into the details, but the average contract term of a corporate real estate outsourcing engagement was about 4 to 5 years. So you would monetize a 5-year contract that had a revenue and profit stream every year, and it was thick margins, which is why I went into it. You know, I mean, the business, the commercial real estate business, on a one-off basis, the commissions are phenomenal. Imagine if you go into a corporation and you say, all the contracts and all the new deals you're going to do for the next 5 years, I want to do them all. We did all you know. Contract. So we could monetize it. We might give up a chunk of what we were going to make in the first year, but we knew we had 4 more years. And then once, with outsourcing, you're usually on site, so you get in the bloodstream of the customer, and there's a 95% renewal rate at the end of the term. So you pay up front, but these public companies weren't thinking that way. And we were using that as a creative way to overcome.
As long as you have a contract, that was great. In our business, you never get away with that.
Yeah.
It's, each day is by itself.
Right. Yeah, if you're in a business where every transaction stands on its own,
right,
yeah, that's not going to work, because
you may get a company like Walmart or Thomas.
Yeah, no, these were 5 no-cut contracts, on average 5-year term. So we could do a lot of things. But the value now is, now what they've done is the procurement officers of the companies have squeezed the margins down. But early on, and we were in the initial wave of corporate real estate outsourcing, our business was born in 1991, and if you remember back at that time, it was do more with less. Outsourcing was a perfect solution.
It's the same thing in the garment business too. I mean, profits are way up. Everybody's
right.
So it's all business.
Yeah. Yeah.
In one of the slides, you show the word ethical profits. I used profits to be ethical.
Right.
I used to work for a bank, and I drive a Volkswagen diesel. So, to the chagrin of one of my neighbors. Can you talk a little bit more about the conflict between ethics and profits?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you clued in on that, because that was the bottom point. Behave ethically and profits will follow. There were a couple things that we did, and maybe it was because we had long-term contracts, which is, as the business expanded, We had about 500 employees, and we would tell the employees, if you make a mistake, it's okay, you know, because if we all run a business and we think no one's going to make a mistake, that's bad thinking. So we thought, let's get in front of it and say, if you make a mistake, raise your hand. Because if you don't raise your hand early and a mistake festers into a wound, and then the customer goes hires a lawyer, and then you're forced to hire a lawyer, and the lawyers just want to run up the fees. So first we said, if you make a mistake, tell us. We'll go say we're sorry. And if it's a big enough mistake, we'll make reparation. It was just that simple. And we lived with that. And what that did is, when we would say we were sorry, the customer would go, wow, I can really trust you. I think I'm going to renew that contract for another 5 years. And so it just fed itself. It built on itself. That was kind of one element. The other element is when we hired employees, and we included this in the book, we contracted or listed in every employment agreement 5 things. And one of those things was hold the company accountable to any commitment it made to you, and be held accountable by the company to any commitment that you've made. And we always said, if you dealt with someone inside the company or outside the company that wouldn't reduce to writing what they were agreeing, you should be wary. And we followed a lot of those simple, basic things. And honestly, we never were in court through the whole gestation of the company. Not once. So we saved a boatload of money that way. So our point was, behave ethically and profits will follow. If you behave ethically, trust rises. If you're in a contractual renewal business and you have trust at a peak, that's where you want to be.
And if you're behaving ethically with your employees as well, not just your customers, again, you're going to have great relationships. You'll be able to build, and people will stay with you. You won't get the churn.
I'd like to circle back to the marketing and advertising for a second. And actually 2 parts of this. Relates to technology as well. Social media. What is your thoughts on social media when it comes to marketing and advertising? And secondly, technology. Do you recommend looking into technology coming down the pike and how that's going to affect your plans? For example, in the publishing business, knowing what I know today, I probably wouldn't dare go into sending out a $200 periodical 4 times a year. You know, I'd probably want to do that online. So I'd like you to see if you could comment on some of those aspects.
Well, I mean, social media, I think if you're not in it, you really, honestly, my belief is you're not going to be effective. You have to be committed to social media. All facets, all different times, and you have to be paying attention to it every day, and you have to have dedicated people on it. And it's growing, and it's going. And we know we have a full-time social media director just on this book. So that's how committed we are to it. We're putting blogs out at least once a week. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn. We advertise on Facebook and LinkedIn. We use Twitter. We post tweets 3 times a day. So we are totally, so my answer to that is social media is huge. It's only going to get bigger, and you definitely have to pay attention to it.
And it keeps changing. It also depends on which kind of business you're in. I have a cousin who has a design firm, interior design, and she's on Instagram because she can show pictures of all of the stuff that she's doing. She's on Pinterest because she can show pictures of her work, and that's where you want to be. If you're a business-to-business person, you probably want to be more on LinkedIn and be posting on LinkedIn. They have a way to publish articles and share articles to show your expertise. There's so many different ways to use social media, but I agree with Ed. You absolutely, positively have to be using it. And you have to pay attention to how it's changing and which one is going to give you the demographic you want for your own target audience.
And the second point, number 8, augment profits with proprietary technology. Sequentia Solutions, there were 4 businesses there. Sequentia was an outgrowth of customer demands within our space of corporate real estate outsourcing. Those projects that were happening were computer science, United Technologies projects around the world. They wanted to know who touched that project last. And we developed proprietary software called Sequentia. Sequential tracking was the genesis of the name. And so that they could have an immediate purview of who touched the project last and where was it on budget. So I'm a big believer on whatever business if you wrap it in technology that represents glue that tightens the relationship between you and your customer base, you have a much higher probability of differentiating your product, giving the customer more what they want, and renewing the contract.
I recognize that you didn't have enough time to cover all the 10 Commandments. It would have been great if you'd been able to do that. But can you just concentrate on number 6 for me and tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. 6 is recognize and hire lightning in a bottle. It's as if you're in the NFL draft and you know you need an offensive tackle. And lo and behold, Ezekiel Elliott, the running back for the Cowboys, is available. Do you stick with going after the offensive tackle that you need, or do you see lightning and you reach deep into your pocket and say, we'll get the offensive tackle on the next round. This resource is a game changer for us. We're going to spend the money to change the game to bring the resource on board, like LeBron James or Curry or any of those folks. And I had 5 chances to do that in the gestation of our business, and we dug deep and gave away equity, and those 5 people, they opened up new lines of business, they helped us scale the business successfully, they changed the business model, they helped us grow globally. They did things that I couldn't have done if I hadn't had them on board. And so my point of recognizing higher lightning in a bottle is sometimes everything's going along swimmingly and you have to dig deep and maybe give up some equity or give up more cash or a mixture of both to get that unique talent that happens to be available, grab it, and it will enable your business to do things that it otherwise couldn't have done.
Before we wrap up, I want to just mention to people that when we're done, Ed and Wyn have some copies of the book available for anyone who wants to get one, to buy one, and they'd be happy to sign. And I'll say that at this point we have time for one last question, and I'll take the long walk to the back of the room.
I don't know if I need that. Did you write this book to make money? Did you think you'd make money writing a book, or is this for publicity for your business? If I was in your situation, with your background, very talented and knowledgeable, it would seem better just to write this, send it out to your potential customers in your market segment, and then follow up with that, and you've gotten a lot of leads. But I think writing a book, you make $1.20 a copy, so that's not really what you're looking for.
Make a lot of
Yeah. Were you talking with my wife?
We weren't talking.
Yeah, she just asks me that often. The book's definitely a loss leader. I mean, if you want to make money, don't write a book. Now, if you write a book to cause other things to happen, you're going to run for office, or you're going to, do any number of, you want to go on a professional speaking circuit, or you want to go enter a new market and you need to define yourself within it. Those are secondary objectives. But the primary objective, and really for us, my answer to that would be, we were really looking to give something back that was valuable. Just because we felt like we built up enough knowledge in between our own children and people we knew, and they were seemingly making bad decisions about, and they had rose-colored glasses about what the realities were. And but it's definitely not a moneymaker. You're 100%
Because that goes against your premise, profit, do something. So that negates most of what you put up there.
Fair point. But the show's not over yet. Meaning, the liftoff in gestation. If we knock off 0 to 1 in the lean startup, we'll be back here talking about profit in books.
There will be a sequel. We have to wrap it up. I'm sorry.